You remember the exact moment, don't you? The moment you opened yourself up, really opened yourself up, to someone you thought was safe. You let them see the trembling part of you that you'd kept hidden from everyone else. The part that still aches from something that happened years ago. The part that doubts itself in the dark. The part that's still wounded from a betrayal you've never fully processed. And then you watched as they used it against you. Maybe it was subtle. A reference to your confession during an argument used like a scalpel to cut precisely where you're most tender. Maybe it was casual, a joke at your expense in front of others, revealing something you shared in confidence. Or maybe it was coldly strategic, information you disclosed in intimacy, now weaponized in a moment of conflict to prove you were broken all along. You felt something shift inside you that day. Something hardened. Something that used to be soft and trusting became armored and alert. Here's the paradox that nobody tells you about emotional survival. The very openness that makes you human, the vulnerability that creates genuine connection, can become the knife someone uses to cut you deepest. And once you've experienced that betrayal, once you've felt the precise agony of having your wounds mocked or manipulated, your nervous system learns a lesson it never forgets. Emotional honesty is dangerous. Visibility is a liability. Trust is a trap. But here's what makes this particularly cruel. The thing that saved you is now the thing sabotaging you. Because after you've been hurt this way, you don't just become cautious. You become a master architect of emotional facades. You learn to show people curated versions of your pain, sanitized, palatable, never the raw truth. You learn to perform vulnerability instead of actually being vulnerable. You learn to give people just enough to seem open while keeping the real wounds buried so deep that even you sometimes forget where you hid them. And the cost? The cost is that you're now living in a world where nobody actually knows you, where connection feels like a performance, where intimacy is always measured and controlled, where you're surrounded by people but profoundly, existentially alone. Let's be precise about what we're actually discussing here. This isn't about trust issues in the pop psychology sense. This is about something far more complex, a phenomenon that psychologists call defensive relational schema formation, following what attachment theorist John Bowlby identified as a fundamental betrayal of the attachment bond. When you experience the weaponization of your emotional disclosure, when someone you trusted uses your vulnerability against you, your brain doesn't just register disappointment, it registers danger. The anterior cingulate cortex, the part of your brain responsible for processing social pain, lights up in the same way it would if you'd experienced physical injury. Your amygdala, your threat detection system, creates what neuroscientists call a conditioned fear response to emotional exposure itself. Think of it like this. Your psyche begins operating like a nation that's been invaded through a route it thought was safe. The bridge you used for connection becomes the bridge you blow up to prevent future attacks. You don't just guard that entry point. You mine the entire landscape of emotional intimacy. This is where the concept of selective vulnerability emerges. But it's more complex than simple caution. What develops is something psychologists call avoidant attachment adaptation, a sophisticated psychological defense system where you maintain relationships but keep them at precisely calibrated distances. You become fluent in the language of seeming close while remaining fundamentally unavailable. You learn to share horizontal information, stories, experiences, observations, while withholding vertical depth. Your actual feelings about those stories, your fears, your shame, your authentic need for support. The brilliant psychiatrist Carl Jung had a term for this. He called it wearing a persona, a social mask that becomes so convincing that even the wearer forgets there's a face underneath. But here's what Jung understood that many miss. The persona isn't just about hiding from others. It's about hiding from yourself. Because if you can't show your wounds to anyone else, you eventually stop acknowledging them to yourself. The pain doesn't disappear. It goes underground into what Jung called the shadow. the repository of everything we can't integrate into our conscious identity. And here's the neurological reality. Your default mode network, the brain system responsible for self-referential thinking and autobiographical memory, begins to create what researchers call a false narrative coherence. You tell yourself stories about your past that minimize the impact of the betrayal. It wasn't that bad. I'm over it. I don't even think about it anymore. But your body remembers. Your nervous system remains in a state of what trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk calls chronic hypervigilance, constantly scanning for signs that someone might hurt you again. Let me tell you about the cost that nobody discusses, the hidden price tag of this learned guardedness. It's the specific loneliness of being surrounded by people who think they know you, while you're aware that they only know your carefully constructed representative. It's the exhaustion of performing normalcy, of editing yourself in real time, of calculating exactly how much to reveal in every interaction. It's the grief, and yes, it is grief, of sacrificing authenticity for the illusion of safety. This is the invisible grief of the emotionally armored. You mourn the version of yourself who used to trust freely. You mourn the relationships you can't fully enter. You mourn the spontaneous joy of unguarded connection that other people seem to access so easily. There's a profound philosophical dimension to this suffering that the ancient Stoics understood. Epictetus wrote, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." But what he didn't write, what lived experience teaches, is that we have 1 heart and must choose carefully who gets to see inside it. Because once that heart has been broken by betrayal, it doesn't heal back into its original shape. It heals into something different. Stronger, yes, but also harder. More protected, yes, but also more isolated. The core fear driving this behavior is not, as people assume, the fear of vulnerability itself. It's something more specific and more devastating. It's the fear that your pain is ammunition, that your wounds are weaknesses to be exploited, that the moment you show someone the tender, unhealed parts of yourself, you're handing them the instruction manual for how to destroy you. And this fear makes everything complex. A simple, "How are you?" becomes a strategic calculation. How much truth can I safely share? A deepening friendship triggers anxiety rather than joy. What happens when they know me well enough to hurt me? Intimacy in romantic relationships becomes a tightrope walk. How do I stay connected without becoming completely exposed? Here's what the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard understood about this kind of suffering. He wrote about the sickness unto death, which wasn't physical illness but spiritual despair. Specifically, the despair of not being able to be yourself. This is your condition, not the dramatic, visible suffering that gets sympathy, but the quiet, chronic ache of living behind walls you built for protection, but that have become a prison. You become someone who is always, always alone, even in a crowded room, even in a relationship, even surrounded by family. Because alone isn't about physical proximity. Alone is about emotional isolation. Alone is about knowing that no one has the full story. Alone is about carrying your actual pain by yourself while maintaining a persona of someone who's doing fine. And perhaps the cruelest part, you start to believe that this is just who you are, that you're naturally private or just independent or don't need that much support. You gaslight yourself about your own need for genuine connection because admitting that need means admitting how desperately lonely you actually are. Let's talk about how this shows up in your actual life, because this isn't theoretical. This is the daily texture of your existence. You might find yourself in serial shallow relationships. You have many friends, many acquaintances, many people who would say they know you. But if someone asked them about your deepest fear, your most persistent wound, the thing that keeps you awake at 3 a.m., they couldn't answer. You've mastered the art of the surface-level connection that feels meaningful, but requires nothing real from you. You laugh at the right moments, share the acceptable struggles, show up for others, but you never, ever let anyone show up for you in the way that would require true vulnerability. You become someone who overfunctions in relationships. You're the helper, the advisor, the problem solver, the strong one. You position yourself as the person who doesn't need help, who has it together, who can handle anything. This isn't generosity, this is strategy. Because if you're always the one giving support, no one questions why you never ask for it. If you're always the capable one, no one looks too closely at what you're carrying. You've turned caretaking into a shield. You might experience what therapists call disclosure hangovers. On rare occasions when you do open up, maybe after drinks, maybe in a moment of exhaustion, maybe because someone seemed so safe, you wake up the next day flooded with regret and shame. You immediately start damage control, minimizing what you said, checking to see if they remember, creating distance, even ending relationships rather than sit with the discomfort of being known. The vulnerability itself becomes unbearable in retrospect. You develop a hypersensitivity to judgment that others can't see. You're constantly scanning for micro-expressions, tone shifts, hesitations, any sign that someone is judging you, losing respect for you, or seeing you as weak. A moment of silence after you share something becomes evidence that you've said too much. A slight change in someone's demeanor becomes proof that they're pulling away. You live in a state of perpetual threat assessment that exhausts you, but that you can't turn off. You might find yourself in relationships with emotionally unavailable people. And here's the painful irony. You chose them specifically because their unavailability feels safe. They can't weaponize your wounds because they're not interested enough to learn about them. They can't betray your deepest self because you never show it to them. You tell yourself you're trying to find someone more emotionally open, but your nervous system keeps gravitating toward people who won't require real vulnerability from you. You become someone who can speak eloquently about healing without actually doing it. You know all the therapy language. You can discuss attachment styles and trauma responses and inner child work. You might even be the person your friends come to for psychological insight. But for yourself, you intellectualize your pain rather than feeling it. You analyze your wounds rather than tending them. You understand your patterns without changing them. Knowledge becomes another defense, a way to seem self-aware while remaining fundamentally protected. You experience what psychologists call intimacy anorexia in romantic relationships. You can handle the beginning stages, the excitement, the surface level sharing, even the physical intimacy. But as soon as a relationship demands emotional nakedness, as soon as someone wants to know the real, unedited you find ways to create distance. You pick fights. You focus on their flaws. You suddenly become too busy or need space. Because the terror of being fully known is greater than the pain of being alone. You might notice you have a compulsive need to test people. Before you share anything real, you offer something small and vulnerable. Then watch carefully to see what they do with it. Do they gossip? Do they use it as leverage? Do they treat you differently? You're constantly running experiments, gathering data, assessing risk. And because you're looking for danger, you often find it, even when it's not there. A misunderstood comment becomes evidence. A joke becomes proof. You find reasons to stay protected. Here's what you need to understand. These are coping strategies, not your true personality. These are adaptations you developed in response to real danger. And they worked. They kept you safe. They prevented further harm. Your psyche deserves credit for that. But what worked for you as a survival mechanism is now limiting your capacity for the very thing you actually long for. Genuine, unguarded, mutual connection, where you can be fully yourself and fully held. The path forward isn't about forcing yourself to trust everyone. It's not about tearing down your walls recklessly or engaging in performative vulnerability. It's about learning to distinguish between people who have earned access to your tender places and people who haven't. It's about what Brené Brown calls trust-earning behaviors. Slowly, carefully learning that not everyone who knows your wounds will weaponize them. But first, You have to stop gaslighting yourself. You have to witness the pain instead of minimizing it. You have to acknowledge that, yes, someone hurt you. Yes, it changed you. Yes, you're still carrying it. And yes, the loneliness you feel is real. Not a character flaw, not weakness, but the natural consequence of living behind walls. So how do you begin to heal this? How do you learn to trust again without becoming naive? How do you become vulnerable again without becoming reckless? The answer begins with what Carl Jung called making the unconscious conscious. You have to first acknowledge the pattern. You have to name what happened to you, not to dwell on it, but to stop letting it operate in the shadows of your psyche. Because as Jung also said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The first step is radical honesty with yourself about your actual state. Not the story you tell others, not the persona you maintain, but the truth. You're lonely. You're tired of performing. You long to be known, but you're terrified of being seen. You want connection, but you've forgotten how to allow it. This acknowledgement is not weakness. It's the beginning of reclaiming your power. The second step is what therapists call inner child reparenting. That part of you that learned emotional honesty is dangerous. That part is young. That part is still holding the pain of the original betrayal. You have to speak to that part the way a good parent speaks to a frightened child. I know you're scared. I know you learned that sharing your feelings leads to pain. But I'm the adult now. I get to choose who we trust. I get to protect you differently. You don't have to be vigilant anymore. I'll handle the vigilance. Your job is just to feel. The third step is practicing what Brené Brown calls selecting a small, safe audience. You don't heal by opening up to everyone. You heal by finding one or two people who have proven, through consistent action over time, that they can hold your pain without weaponizing it. People who have shown up. People who have kept confidence. People whose own relationship with vulnerability suggests they understand its sacredness. You start small with these people, not with your biggest trauma, but with something moderately vulnerable. And you watch, not with paranoia, but with curiosity. How do they respond? Do they honor what you've shared? Do they lean in with compassion or pull back with judgment? The fourth step is embracing what Buddhist psychology calls the middle way. You don't have to choose between total guardedness and reckless openness. You can learn discernment. You can learn that trust is not binary, it's graduated. Some people earn access to your story, but not your ongoing emotional state. Some people earn access to your struggles, but not your deepest wounds. Some people, rare, precious people, earn access to all of you, and that's okay. Selective vulnerability isn't pathology, it's wisdom. The fifth step is the practice of what Jungian analysts call shadow work. You have to befriend the wounded part of you that you've been trying to hide. Not just from others, but from yourself. That part that's still angry about the betrayal. That part that's still grieving the innocence you lost. That part that's still desperately lonely but pretending it's fine. You have to invite that part into consciousness. Let it speak. Let it be witnessed by you. Because you can't heal what you won't acknowledge. You can't integrate what you keep exiled. And here's what's possible on the other side of this work. Not a return to naive trust, but something better. Earned trust with worthy people. Not a life without walls, but a life where your walls have doors that you control. Not the elimination of fear, but the courage to be vulnerable anyway with people who have proven they'll protect what you share. The philosopher Martin Buber wrote about what he called the I-thou relationship, a form of connection where both people show up as their full, authentic selves, where vulnerability is met with reverence rather than exploitation. He contrasted this with I-it relationships, where people use each other strategically, where vulnerability is treated as weakness to exploit. Your wound has taught you to expect I-it relationships. Your healing will teach you to identify and nurture I-thou relationships. This is difficult work. Some days you'll regress. Some days you'll shut down completely. Some days you'll be triggered by the smallest thing and all your walls will slam back into place. This doesn't mean you're failing. This means you're human. This means you're doing the work of unlearning a survival strategy that your nervous system is deeply invested in maintaining. But listen to me. You are not broken because you learned to protect yourself. You are not damaged because you became careful with your heart. You are not defective because you can no longer trust indiscriminately. What you are is someone who survived something that should never have happened. Someone who learned through painful experience that not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Someone who built walls not because you're cold, but because you're protecting something precious. The goal now is not to tear down those walls. The goal is to learn to lower the drawbridge for the people who have earned the right to enter. To learn that selective vulnerability isn't withholding, it's wisdom. To learn that you can be both open and protected, both trusting and discerning, both connected and boundaried. The poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." But he didn't say you have to show everyone your wound. He didn't say you have to let everyone hold it. Some wounds are sacred. Some pain is yours to share only with those who've proven they'll treat it as holy. Your healing doesn't require you to become someone who trusts everyone again. Your healing requires you to become someone who trusts yourself to know who's safe, who can look at someone's actions over time and make wise assessments, who can protect the tender parts while still allowing connection with the worthy. This is your work. This is your path. Not to become invulnerable, but to become wise. Not to become closed, but to become discerning. Not to become fixed, but to become whole. And to anyone watching who recognizes themselves in this, you're not alone in this loneliness. Your wounds don't make you unworthy of love. They make you careful about where you place it. And that careful, discerning heart of yours, it's not broken, it's wise, it's learned, it's protecting something valuable. The question isn't whether you'll ever trust again. The question is, will you learn to trust your own judgment about who deserves your trust? If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more conversations that meet you in the depth of your experience. And remember, the goal isn't to go back to who you were before you learned this lesson. The goal is to move forward as someone who knows their worth, protects their peace, and chooses connection with people who've earned the privilege of knowing the real you. You are not too guarded. You are not too careful. You are not too much or too broken or too damaged. You are simply someone learning to be vulnerable with wisdom instead of recklessness. And that's not a wound. That's evolution.